He saw his first Kentucky Derby, the first Kentucky Derby, from the Churchill Downs infield as a 13-year-old kid. He began running the track in 1902 and worked tirelessly for the next 47 years to cultivate the Derby into the world's premier thoroughbred race. He was Colonel Matt Winn, and his contribution to the horse racing industry and the city of Louisville can't be overstated.
Colonel Matt Winn, I think, is one of the most fascinating characters in the history of the city of Louisville, and clearly the most important figure in the history of Churchill Downs. He's the architect of Churchill Downs as we know it today, the architect of the Kentucky Derby as we know it today. And given the influence of the racetrack, given the importance of the Kentucky Derby to life in this region, and frankly as a world-class sports event, I would suggest to you that Matt Winn is not only a notable citizen of the city of Louisville, but one of the most important residents in the history of the state of Kentucky.
People who only know Churchill Downs in its present form may not realize that during its early years, its very survival was always a question mark. But when Colonel Winn came on the scene, it was the beginning of a new era.
When Matt Winn and the new management team came aboard at Churchill Downs in 1902, the track was really in a dire predicament. It was really in danger of meeting the wrecking ball. The track had never turned a profit since its opening in 1875, but this team went to work under Winn's leadership as then general manager and immediately righted the ship, built a new clubhouse, sold memberships to the clubhouse, and within a year, the track turned its first profit ever.
Colonel Winn understood that the lifeblood of Churchill Downs would always be the Kentucky Derby, and he also understood that it would take a new innovative thinking to expand the appeal of the Derby beyond the boundaries of the Commonwealth.
He was the one that courted the media. His famous saying was, give me the top 5 sports writers in New York City and you can have all the rest. And he really catered to the media, especially the East Coast media.
I've always said that horse racing is a writer's sport. They're just incredible human interest stories. And Colonel Winn, I think, understood that. And that's the hook. He figured that once he got them here, that they would get hooked on the sport and on the stories, and he was exactly right. He was just really, really smart about understanding who influenced public opinion, how to generate interest. When Donerail won the Kentucky Derby in 1913 and paid an exorbitant price, he made sure that was really publicized in the East. And then when the filly Regret won the Derby in 1915, that was another story that he really used those kinds of stories to promote interest in the Kentucky Derby. And once he got the influential and powerful New York columnists and then later on the radio commentators involved, that just made the Derby.
Colonel Winn clearly had an understanding of his business, but it was far more than just a business. It was his life, and that personal involvement was what made all the difference.
He really loved Louisville, he loved the Kentucky Derby, he loved the horses, and he loved the horsemen. That literally was his life. And he lived it, he breathed it, he promoted it every single day that he lived. And sure enough, I mean, that kind of persistence and dedication, it really worked.
When he passed away in 1949, Colonel Matt Winn had witnessed every Kentucky Derby ever run. He'd turned Churchill Downs into one of the all-time great sports landmarks, and he had benefited this community immeasurably by making sure that every year on the first Saturday in May, the world's attention would be focused right here on Louisville, Kentucky.
Matt Winn's work at Churchill Downs on behalf of the racetrack and the Kentucky Derby has helped shape the identity of Louisville here in this country and internationally. When people think of Louisville around the world, they think of the Twin Spires, they think of the Kentucky Derby. They may not know they're thinking about Matt Winn. He has been gone since 1949, but his legacy is alive. He was a one-of-a-kind, larger-than-life individual, and his influence is felt every day. Every time you look at those Twin Spires and think of what happens here at Churchill Downs, you have to think of Matt Winn and what he brought to this track, this sport, and this community.
I think he envisioned where the Derby is now. He probably didn't know exactly, but innately he knew what the Derby could become and really set about creating the foundation and pushing it in that direction.
Former Churchill Downs president Tom Meeker once said of Colonel Winn, he was the painter who created the masterpiece, and the rest of us are nothing more than frame makers. That's a fitting description of the man who made the Kentucky Derby what it is today, and something we should all remember every year on the first Saturday in May.